I'm David Lee, host of University Journal. In mid-1997, the Kentucky General Assembly passed the Post-Secondary Improvement Act, a major piece of legislation changing the way post-secondary education operates throughout the Commonwealth. On the next edition of University Journal, we'll get a one-year update on the reform effort from President Ronald Eaglin, president of Morehead State University. Please join us for our conversation.
Funding for University Journal is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding was provided by the Kentucky Fund for Independent Production and by viewers like you who support quality programs such as University Journal that appear only on public television.
Welcome to University Journal. I'm David Lee. In mid-1997, the Kentucky General Assembly passed the Post-Secondary Improvement Act, a significant piece of legislation designed to change the way higher education is conducted in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Joining us to give us an update on the reform effort now 1 year later is President Ronald Eaglin of Morehead State University. President Eaglin holds a doctorate in educational psychology from the University of Utah and has held administrative posts at several universities. He's now in his 7th year as president of Morehead State University. President Eaglin, I know you're a very busy person, and I appreciate you taking a little time to be with us on University Journal.
Well, it's my pleasure on this important topic to be here with you.
Let's start with a little bit by way of comparison. How would you compare what's happening in higher education reform in Kentucky with the kinds of changes that are taking place or not taking place in some of the other states around the country?
Well, I think in Kentucky we're still catching up. I think the reorganization pattern that we went into by bringing our technical education centers and our community colleges together, these are things that happened 20 years ago in many other states. I think it was a very positive move then for them. I think it will continue to be a positive move for us. Bringing our research universities into national prominence in terms of their research capacity, again, many states have made that commitment many, many years before. I'm very pleased that that has been done here, and it allows University of Louisville, University of Kentucky, each with their individual mission to be more prevalent in the area of research and development, because that can do nothing but help our Commonwealth in terms of attracting the types of industries and the types of jobs for the future. As far as the regional universities like Western Kentucky and Morehead State University, I think it also allows us to create our own niche in this body of need of the state, of providing what I think the primary givers of undergraduate education, but also to distinguish ourselves in terms of particular curriculums that can be helpful to the Commonwealth. And collectively, when you look at all of what we are doing in that program, to really provide alternatives in higher education that are very, very useful to our population.
Many of the ideas that got incorporated into the reform effort were ideas that have been around in Kentucky for a long time. What happened in 1997 to create a critical mass to make this reform effort successful this time?
I think leadership, a courageous leadership at the governor's level. Many governors have talked about reform in higher education in this state. It's always a popular topic. I think it's a very, when one is running, it's a very good thing to say that we are going to do something for higher education and help the Commonwealth become better served by higher education. I think you asked about the critical difference was this governor was willing to go out on a limb and stake his political future on this particular concept. Now, having done that, then it took a lot of other people to make it work.
And just to pick up on that point, in many ways it seems to me that the great challenge for the reform effort in the Commonwealth is to get it out of the halls of the legislature, out of Frankfort, and into classrooms and laboratories and studios of institutions all across the state. From the perspective of parents and students, as a consequence of this reform effort, what kinds of things might they see differently on a day-to-day basis in a few years?
Well, obviously, I think they'll see a more uniform system. In other words, there'll be points of entry that make sense, and a degree of collaboration and cooperation that makes it possible, no matter where one enters into higher education, there's another outlet for them if they so wish. If you have a disjointed system like we had before the reform, a person could go to a technical educational center, for example, receive very valuable instructional opportunities for them, in other words, do very well, but they could take it nowhere else. In the community college system, we were a little better in that we did have an avenue for community college graduates and where they would go. But I think seeing a system that makes sense and how they interrelate with one another will cause the types of cooperation and collaboration that will make it better for the population. However, I think when you talk about educational reform, you can't escape one fundamental fact. It all really is at the feet of individual faculty. Once that classroom door closes, that's basically where things happen or don't happen. And I hope in this reform we don't get too caught up just in the rearranging of the deck chairs, if you will, but we go to the fundamental issues of what is taught, how it's taught, and how we can support those wonderful professionals who have the responsibility of teaching, no matter what level it is at.
Many universities in Kentucky and other country as well have a faculty that to a large extent was hired in the late 60s and early 70s. And there is a bit of an expectation that in the next 5 to 10 years there will be a number of retirements and considerable change in the ranks of faculty institutions across the Commonwealth. What sort of person, what kinds of credentials should universities be looking for in hiring those new assistant professors in the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, I think you're very perceptive of this change of person power, because that's happening even here. We have about 60% new people in the last 6 years. That is a tremendous change of an institution. I think an institution has to do a few things to answer your question. One, don't lose sight of your mission. And so when you're seeking faculty, you need to seek faculty that understand your mission as an institution and can fit into that mission in such a way that they can truly do their trade, either as continued researchers or teachers. Secondly, we have not seen prior to the last 5 or 6 years much change in the methodology used by professors in terms of teaching their courses. Just as recent as 4 years ago, we didn't have a distance learning laboratory or a distance learning classroom on this campus. We didn't have training programs on how to use technology and multimedia. Those are relatively recent events, and that's not discounting the whole impact of how people access information through the computers and through the various ways now that students can attract information. So you ask, what does a faculty member have to have? I think they have to be strong in their discipline. They have to understand their discipline, for sure. You cannot escape that. But also they have to be flexible in how they teach, more cognizant of the people they teach, and more cognizant of different ways to teach the material, and not be caught into a lockstep that we have had for a long period of time, that all courses are going to be 45 hours in a given semester. They're all going to be 3-hour blocks. If you accumulate enough of these blocks, you can graduate. I think we're going to see in the next 10 years a tremendous difference of attitudes in the population that need education for them to proceed in their quest for a successful life. And that may not be degree, it may be degree. There's a whole variety now that I think will amplify more than just the non-traditional student that we've taught the same way we taught the traditionals. I think that technology is going to change, has changed our life significantly already, and will continue to change our life. And faculty have to adjust to that. There's no way around that.
You have a background in student personnel services. As I was walking around your campus this morning, I met a student on her way to register, and she had 2 very small children in tow. when I was an undergraduate, that's a sight that probably wouldn't occur.
Very rare. And it's usually a professor. Or the,
Given the fact that the student body is changing, in many ways, much larger percentage of women, more non-traditional students, more students who have jobs and family responsibilities, and also in the broader context of this reform effort, how do universities need to change some of the kinds of services and some of the kinds of support that they provide for undergraduates?
I'll probably regret using this analogy, but several years ago I had to look at our athletic program and make a decision about what we would have to do as an institution to stay Division I. And part of that decision-making process was exactly what you're saying now. We have traditionally offered certain sorts of services and activities, etc., geared toward the 18 to 22-year-old. Now, the modern student has so many other needs that they bring to the table. And so often our fee structure and how we organize our student affairs, how we organize other factors are still geared to the mind of that 18, 20-year-old. So we're in a little bit of a paradox here. We have a new clientele. You talk to a 35-year-old single parent, let's just say female, just to say that, with 3 children and no husband. They're more interested in daycare than they are of going out and watching a football game. But yet, we will spend $45 to promote the football and $0 to promote daycare. So I think the challenge for us is to get a balance of what we need to provide in services for the modern student. And that means that some of the traditional areas where we have placed money may not be in the same privileged position that they were in the past. And as a consequence, this is going to create some elation, if you will, in some of the populations that have been underserved, but also will bring out other problems with alumni and who have been used to these other services, seeing them go away. So it's a tough job, and I think the modern executive or the modern president has to be willing to take these issues head on.
To continue to talk about the kind of student that you've mentioned here, somebody who's 35 years old, a couple of children, variety of responsibilities, in addition to academic responsibilities, what are your 2 or 3 best ideas about how you retain that sort of student? How do you keep that student in the system all the way to graduation?
First, you try to understand that student. When we talk to the typical 18 to 22-year-olds, we run under the assumption that this is something in their life which is just orderly. You continue your education, you get your degree. And it should be utmost and paramount in their mind to be serious students and do a great job. With the older student, we find that they are serious students, but they have to balance so many other factors that will come ahead of the institution. Child rearing, fiscal issues, housing, transportation. Now, you asked the question, what do we need to do and be aware of that? What few things. One, we have to recognize it. Secondly, I think we have to put support services in that are geared towards these types of people. And third, I think we should work just as hard to find financial aid dollars for these persons than we do the typical 18 to 22-year-old. Our federal program does not recognize the older student as well as it does the new student coming out. Even our state aid programs favor the 18-year-old. But our country runs on the philosophy of many chances and many ways to access education. I think that's what makes us great. And so if we are going to offer the opportunity for a 35-year-old to come back and for a way to better her or his life and therefore their family, then we have to have the services in place to do that. And we need to be willing to make the decisions and to help them along their way. And I think you know from your experience as a professor that these are serious students. They put the time because they know what they're in school for. They're in there for their family and themselves and for betterment of their lives.
What impact do you think the Commonwealth Virtual University will have on access to higher education across the Commonwealth, and what kind of impact do you think it might or might not have in the region that Morehead State primarily serves?
I sat on the distance learning group for the state that is planning the virtual university. I think we're high on hopes, but we're short on hows. I think there still is a whole set of different assumptions of what that virtual university will be. All of the assumptions are good ones, but we can't manage all of them. As far as access is concerned, I think the governor, when he first thought of the virtual university and started talking about it, I think he saw it as a way of accessing more place-bound types of individuals in work settings or in a variety of settings. If one looks at the Commonwealth, we have a good access system of higher education in this state already. Between the community colleges, the regional universities, and the technical education centers, higher education is fairly well accessible to most residents in the Commonwealth. I personally see that in my own bias, I don't think we should be thinking about creating a whole new university that is electronically based. What I would hope that we do is look what's out there and grab the best that we can and use the best that we can offer internally, and maybe even see the university, the virtual university, more as a broker, if you will, for quality, to enhance existing programs that are already there. For example, at Western and at Morehead, there are things we can't afford. At least I know we can't afford them, but we might be able to get them off other systems. In other words, bring the world to us, professors to us that we can't afford to go out and get. On the other side, I think there are some people in our organization and your organization that would be wonderful resources for the world. And we want to make sure that that can go that direction also. So I see a system that is balanced between what you bring in and what you take out, or what you give out. If we create a system only where we export, then I don't think we'll be successful, because there's too many others out there doing that now. I think we need to be a balance, what we bring in as courses, what we give out as courses, and then we use kind of a home model, if you will, of how universities will use that, community colleges will use that. Then when you get out of the educational realm as far as credit is concerned, I think we have unlimited potential in terms of training. Just good old continuing education where people can get in and learn a certain skill that they want, etc., using this technology. We are already, and I know you do it too, we're already working with industry and beam right into the workplace and provide courses, and in some cases degrees, directly to distinct populations and areas. So I don't have the answer. I think that we have good minds thinking about this in the Commonwealth, and what else can you ask? And it will evolve. And with good leadership out of the Council for Post-Secondary Education, which I think we have now, I think we will, 1 year from now, be better able to answer that question more definitively.
Let me ask you a question about athletics. For a good many years, I think the model for institutions like Morehead or Western was traditional age student, 4 years in residence, and athletics was a part of the student culture. As that becomes less and less the profile of the typical undergraduate, whatever the typical undergraduate might be, what is the role for athletics, particularly spectator athletics, at the university of the next 10 or 20 years?
Well, we can't get too academic about that, because our society really thinks a great deal about athletics. The professional sports, our children involved in various activities in their life. A lot of our culture revolves around sport. Also, I would say that we still have large numbers of traditional students. We have to have traditional students at Morehead. We have too many residence halls beds not to. And so we still have a large population of 18 to 22-year-olds. Where I think, as a former member of the NCAA President's Commission, which I sat on for 5 years through all the reform, I think that some of our institutions try to emulate the big business that exists in the Division 1A programs, like the University of Kentucky, University of Louisville, University of Arkansas, and you can go on and on. But when you count those schools that are profitable, where they offer major events, if you will, in terms of football and basketball, they're only about 65 in number. There are 3,000 schools that have athletic programs. So why an institution like us, now I can't speak for Western, would want to try to emulate what goes on at the University of Kentucky makes no sense. What we need, in my opinion, is a balanced program for, yes, the spectator value, but also for the participation value. I was a 4-year college athlete. I learned a great deal. I would never give those 4 years away. They were wonderful years of me learning about myself and others. But to balance that in institutions like ours is very difficult because it does cost money. Everything has a price tag on it. So what one has to do, I think, is to try to decide what's right for their institution. In my particular case, when I looked at our future, we wanted to stay Division I. We felt that was important. But to be Division I, you have to meet the rules of Division I. And the rules of 1-2A Division I and all Division I is to have gender equity. The only way our school could have maintained gender equity in their athletics program to stay Division I would have been to put tremendous fees on our students to accomplish that. In other words, create new dollars. I didn't see that as a viable alternative. So I thought we had to look internally, like we do with all of our academic programs, like we do in anything else, to determine how can we redistribute dollars to meet our goal of being Division I. Obviously, then I had to make a very tough decision with a lot of support of moving a program which had been Division I forever with full scholarships to a non-scholarship program. I caught a lot of heat for that, including people asking for my resignation. I will say this, that for every one that said you should resign, I got 9 that said wonderful for us. But it has not changed our institution nor lessened us. If anything, it's strengthened us. And now we have a solid Division I program and a very viable football program. So I would suggest that all higher educational institutions have to look at that because eventually it will become an issue, I think, on all campuses in the next 5 to 10 years. It already is, but I think people want to hide from it. They don't want to face the issue. And as a faculty member, I know you know that most faculty take a very simplistic view to this. They just say, well, do away with it. You know, do away with this or that or the other. Well, that's not necessarily the only alternative. There are other alternatives to solve problems. I know at Western this issue came up 3 or 4 years ago, and I think that you handled it the best way for your culture, and we handled it the best way for our culture.
One of the things that's been a hallmark of Morehead State University for a good many years is an active role in development in Eastern Kentucky. Particularly as the higher education reform movement begins to change the nature of universities. How do you see that role changing in the next 10 or 20 years? What kinds of things might the university try to do to better or more effectively serve its public than it's done in the past?
If anything, I think the reform is going to encourage more collaboration and cooperation. We have a long pattern here of cooperating with community colleges and cooperating with the technical education centers in our area. So in a way, it won't affect us as much as it may other institutions, because we have found that we could not do all that is needed in Eastern Kentucky by ourselves. We partner every time we can. We partner with the University of Kentucky or with Eastern Kentucky University or with the state, whatever it takes. But I think the reform is going to bring all the players to the table, and I think when you bring all the players to the table in post-secondary education, only good things can happen, because my experience is that educators want things to work, and they want them to work in a positive way to serve their clientele. And in our particular case, we're very proud of our heritage of Eastern Kentucky. We think a great deal of Eastern Kentucky and its people and its leadership. And our role is not going to change. We're going to reinforce that leadership. We're going to reinforce the changes that need to be made to bring a viable economy to this region. And that's part of our goal and part of our mission, something we feel very strongly about. But we're going to do that in cooperation. Not only cooperation with other educational institutions, we're going to do that with whether it be chambers or whether it be economic development groups or what have you. And we should serve and realize that in your part of the country you have a lot of businesses. We don't have that here. We have a lot of mom and pop, a lot of individuals that do things as entrepreneurs, but no big business. When you look at Eastern Kentucky, our $104 million operation is probably one of the biggest businesses in Eastern Kentucky. And we feel that we have to be a good neighbor in our region and do everything in our power to help. So the reform hasn't changed as much. I just think it's given us more tools to accomplish what I think needs to be accomplished.
One of the themes of higher education in recent years, and it's an old one, but it's gotten probably a new emphasis, is an emphasis on making sure students have a global perspective, a sense of how they and their cultural and economic sides might interact literally around the world. Could you talk about some of the kinds of things that are going on at Morehead State to help give students that kind of perspective?
Because of our isolationism, I think, over many, many years, we feel we have to bring the world to Eastern Kentucky. And so therefore it's a very important goal to us. We say diversity is good. You're looking at the most homogeneous population, probably outside of Indian reservations in the country. Basically 0.6% minority, very seldom any international involvement. So we work very hard to bring that to this campus so that the future leaders are exposed to it. Diversity, we feel, and we say constantly to our new students, diversity should be a celebration, because the world that you're going into is going to be a world in which you should celebrate people different from yourself. Man, woman, old, young, black, white, international, local. All of that should be celebrated. How much does it get through to students? I don't know, but I do know they're exposed to it. And if they're exposed, well, then maybe we've done something right.
College professors are much in the business of giving grades. Let me ask you to give a grade to the reform effort. A year into it, what sort of grade would you give the reform effort at this point?
I would certainly give it a progressive grade. I won't give it an A, B, D, C, or E, because those things have so many connotations to it.
It's a new era kind of grading.
But, you know, when young people come to me, sometimes I have to tell them they're an NY. People don't know what an NY is. I call them a not yet. I said, you're almost there, and with a little more attention to yourself and what's around you, you can succeed here and you can succeed in life. I think with the new CPE and the leadership we have there, and I think an excitement of the presidents in post-secondary education, that I think if we ever had a chance of really making a difference, the conditions are there right now.
President Eaglin, I'm afraid the clock has caught up with us. Thanks very much for being with us on University Journal.
Thank you, David.
Our topic on this edition of University Journal has been higher education reform in Kentucky, and our guest has been Professor Ronald Eaglin, President of Morehead State University. For University Journal, I'm David Lee.